I'd like to start with a question that relates to, in a sense, the common element in all of these societies, Virgin Islands, South Africa, and Liberia, which is that they are all multiracial or multi-ethnic in some cases society with different needs and nature, but nonetheless poverty. And I was wondering if any or all of you would like to comment on the challenges of this multi-ethnic, multiracial makeup of society in trying to secure rights of women, and perhaps particularly in relation to issues of gender violence, either in the family, in the workplace, or elsewhere. I'd like to start with some comments on this question.
I'll jump in.
Yes, please.
Well, for the case of Liberia specifically, and more generally West Africa, we have layers of dimensions of culture and cultural practices. And as it relates to the culture, to issues of rape and domestic violence, our culture is quite silent. It's not public. It's not a public matter. So quite recently in Liberia, the Association of Female Lawyers, along with other women's groups, managed to get for the first time a rape law passed into the rape bill passed into law, and it's such a strong law that it's a non-bailable crime, and the punishment for rape now is 12 years to life imprisonment. The difficulty we are now faced with in terms of addressing the issue of rape, first, the issue was we didn't have any law to deal with it. Now that we have the law, going into communities and getting people to really report cases of rape. And so because most of the time there is this whole thing of divine justice. And in the typical Liberian English, they will say, I leave mine to God. God is going to avenge whatever. Or let's talk this the family way, meaning we should have a family conferencing on this particular issue. So going out and really getting people to come out. But this is also layered with the whole thing of stigmatization, because once a person steps out to say I've been raped, their chances of getting married in a tiny community is lowered, and the chance of them ever living a normal life is difficult. So these are some of the difficulties in terms of really advocating for and seeking justice for individuals who have been severely violated. On the issue of domestic violence, it's still tough. In as much as we have Africa's first female president, we still have a mindset that sometimes the family is like, is he buying clothes for you? Yes. Is he feeding the kids? Yes. You have a roof over your head? Yes. It's okay. It'll get better one day. So you more and more you still find women finding it difficult coming out to say that this is what is happening to me in the private space. But it's not because they're not aware of all of these laws and legislation, but it's deeply entrenched into the culture and the way they've been brought up.
Can I perhaps direct this to our Virgin Island colleagues? To say, particularly in taking advantage of the fact that there are colleagues from the bench, what your own take is of these issues that we're discussing this afternoon.
I just wanted to pick up a little bit on what Lema was saying about the issue of domestic violence. The fact that, yes, he is paying the bills, yes, he is providing, that has to some extent kept some women from coming to court and getting an order of protection. But one of the things with our orders of protection is that it does allow us to also put in place provisions for the support of the children, provisions for visitation with the children. And so that has provided women with some comfort. I don't think women in the Virgin Islands should fear coming forward and filing a petition. The fear may come from, as you said, the other pressures, the family. That may stop her from coming. But the organizations like the Family Resource Center, organizations like the Women's Coalition, I mean, women are fully aware of the process and what they need to do. The filling out of a petition is very simple. Some women, can't read or write, but the staff at the court will help them to write it out. If they're not, if they don't speak English, there's Spanish-speaking people on the staff. They will let them write it in English, and then one of the clerks will type it out. Let them write it in Spanish, and one of the clerks will type it out in English. But some of the cultural issues are very similar. Very similar.
Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for this opportunity. One of the things I have experienced working at the Family Resource Center is that a part of the fear of disclosure, and not just with rape or domestic violence, is also connected with what I'll call the climate of the community's attitude towards the stigma of the rape or the abuse. When it comes to the abuse, oftentimes the abuser is a social butterfly, very nice, probably involved in maybe some faith organization, is very helpful to neighbors, and demonstrates characteristics that don't necessarily match what a victim might be experiencing behind closed doors. So coming forward to disclose creates a challenge when everybody thinks that the person that you're accusing of the abuse is so nice and provides the clothing, the food, and is a great provider, and so that they can't imagine that this, the violence or that the abuse is happening. So it can be difficult for victims to disclose and to feel ashamed and to feel afraid, because if the disclosure also leads to separation and the person is the breadwinner and does provide, then the questions come up. And yes, Judge Steele did say that the protection orders provide for certain reliefs, and if for whatever reason some of those things do not happen, especially in cases where if the person's job involves use of a firearm and they may lose the firearm because of the acts of domestic violence, there may be some apprehension to continue with a protection order if that provider may lose the ability to carry the firearm, especially if it's going to have an impact on whether they can continue to work or not.
If I might add,
yes, please.
Good afternoon. In the protective order that is issued in domestic violence cases, as judges, we look at what we can order that would try to keep the family unit together, because notwithstanding the instances of domestic violence, there is still the issue of trying to keep that family unit together. So also included in those orders are provisions sending the victim to counseling and also sending the assailant to some type of intervention program such as Men Terminating Violence, because it's important that we try to keep family units together, and most of the time there is a relationship and long-standing relationship between the parties that are involved in these domestic violence cases. So that's one of the areas that we also focus on as family court judges.
Thank you.
Perhaps,
Yes.
perhaps if I can add on, I think that in addition to some of the work we do is that we also look at cases where to try and reduce what you call the second trauma that women suffer when they're reporting the cases. I think that we have found that in our countries that the first phase of reporting would be to the police, and that we have the justice system, the police system, you know. And sometimes women experience such difficulties with the police, either who have not been trained to deal with or just refuse to deal with victims of rape, who are not sensitive enough, or who just really don't care. I mean, in one instance, one of our clients, actually, we did take up a case on behalf of one of our clients who went to the police station to report that her ex-husband, who had previously been abusive to her, had threatened to kill her. The police did not listen, and subsequently the offender killed her daughter. And I think that it is also just in relation to that, the state's obligation to protect women in those instances, which also plays a very important role. That we may have all these orders, we may have all these tools that are available to us, but if the various sectors, including the police, the judiciary, don't help, then there's just no use. There's no use for any of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think we can continue this dialogue about domestic violence and issues of stigma and so forth for quite a while. But let me move on to raise another question, which is a different kind of violence. So, while Virgin Islands does not have child soldiers like those that have terrorized Liberia, or high level of, but it does have high levels of violence among juveniles, if I understand it, and much of it perhaps gang-related. And do women then in this territory have the will and strength to combat this violence in the way that women of Liberia have taken on the warring factions in their country? What are some of the movements that are taking place here and initiatives amongst women's groups?
If I may respond, we are beginning to see instances of gang violence here in our communities, but more than instances of gang violence, I would say we have more instances of turf violence, where our juveniles seem to think for some strange reason that they own the turf on which they live, and so they have a right to decide who may or may not come to that particular location. Whether or not the women here in the Virgin Islands have the will and the strength to combat that type of violence, I would say yes, they do. But the question I would ask is whether or not they're willing to mobilize in order to combat that type of violence. I think a lot of the violence or the feeling of wanting to belong comes from a lack of a father figure in a lot of our households, and not just a father figure, but just a positive male role model. And what these gangs may offer is just what these juveniles are looking for. They're looking for a sense of belonging that they've never felt in the household, and so they're forced to go on the outside to look for that type of sense or feeling of belonging. It's important that we realize that even in the household where there might be two parents, the juveniles observe and witness violence. So it's not just a lack of having a father figure in the household, it's also even when there is a male in that household, they witness the violence within the household. As I tell parents so often in the courtroom, that they are the first role models for these children, and children will in fact imitate and emulate what they see. They look at your conduct before they listen to your conversation, and they will definitely practice what they see more or long before they look at or listen to what you're preaching. So it's very important that whether it's a one-parent home or a two-parent home, the issues sometimes are still the same, as it concerns violence, that is.
Thank you very much. We would like to mix this up by taking some of the questions from the audience. And I have in front of me here what we consider to be perhaps matched or related questions, so we'll ask them together. Does religion play a positive or negative role in the securing of women's rights? And the other is, what role do the churches play in issues of domestic violence in your country? That is, one is a general one, which says, does religion play a positive or a negative role in the securing of women's rights in general? And the other is more about domestic violence, asking what role the churches play in issues of domestic violence in your country. Please. Any?
I'll tackle the second one. There was a study that was done many years ago about the churches in Liberia, domestic violence as it relates to people within different religious church-based groups. And what it showed was that women in the churches, especially wives of ministers, were the most abused. And the more I talk to people of faith in Liberia, outside and in different parts of the world, it's like a cross-cutting theme that the violence that is experienced in churches, in church communities, is higher. Or someone in New York said to me, that is the birthplace of domestic violence. And people try to justify by all of these different biblical voices that the women should learn in silence, that the women should do this, that the women should do that. And more and more you find churches, in my context, easily engaging in political issues publicly than they would in denouncing issues of wife beating and domestic violence. 2 years ago, there was a case in point where this girl had been repeatedly beaten, and she kept going back to the priest of this Catholic church to say, I'm being abused, and if we don't do something, I'll get killed. The church called a 3-day fast, and she and her husband were encouraged to take part in this fast and prayer with the hope that things would get better. The fast ended, and that weekend he killed her and killed himself. So when the honorable judge was talking about, we try our best to keep the family together, my eyeballs kept going like, even at the detriment of my life, hell no, I'm running.